emotional orientation is, by definition, immature. Like a 2-year-old is run by emotion. Once you mature, you can even think of this technically. As you mature, the control over your perception and behavior moves from instinct-based subcortical structures that govern motivation and emotion, their instincts, to the cortex, which is context-dependent, future-oriented, and communitarian. So, my happiness isn't as important. Let's say my moment-to-moment happiness isn't as important or as meaningful as the psychological and physiological health of my family. So you make sacrifices for that. And life is a sacrificial enterprise.
I even put myself in the hypothetical situation of this. Let's just say, I got a girlfriend, she was annoying me, and I imagined myself being the person saying, I'm annoyed by you and it's probably my fault. And if it is, I want to fix that. And it even made me like a little bitter. Like I was already it had already hurt my
it's very
pride.
annoying.
But it's good because it strips away the ego entirely and makes it completely solution-oriented. It removes the emotions.
But that's assuming the other person's solution-oriented too.
But if you're
yes,
vulnerable...
it also assumes that the solution that you're negotiating towards is one of peace and harmony, right? So you need a that's part of what constitutes a valid religious orientation in the technical sense. It's like, well, what the notion of solution presumes an orientation towards some end. Well, what's the end? Well, that's the religious question. What's the ultimate end? That's the religious question. And it's like, well, why not, if it's your wife and she's annoying you, like, why not just beat her until she stops doing those things? And you say, well, no reasonable person would do that. It's like, well, first of all, you have a lot of, what would you say? You have a lot of unwarranted faith in reason, that's for sure, because it's not obvious at all that that's not a reasonable solution, especially if it worked. That's certainly what tyrants think. It's not like they're unreasonable. So let's say you're oriented towards something like long-term peace and mutual aid and benefit, right? Till death do us part, in sickness and in health, right? And so you're viewing the relationship over the longest possible period of time. And then you're presuming that the other person is indistinguishable from you in that regard. Mm-hmm. Because they are. If you're married, it's like the person that you're married to is there with you all the time. There's no separation between you and her. No, not if you're really thinking about it, because the quality of your experience is dependent upon one another. And so you make a unit. Now, the Christian ideal, this is an ideal that lurks underneath some, but not all, modes of sanctifying the union between men and women. The Christian concept is that you put the union of the two of you at the pinnacle, and that union is the recreation of the original Adam. Because the original Adam, before he was separated into male and female, was both, an amalgam of both, a kind of hypothetical perfect being, hermaphroditic figure. That, anyways, the idea is that you put this, and that's equivalent to Christ, by the way, weirdly enough. The idea is that there's a union of purpose and perception and action that can be attained by the communication between a couple. And you want to elevate that above both of your limited self-interest. So you're always negotiating towards that. It's like, how do we idealize this union? So then if that's your orientation and you're engaged in some strife, the logical question is, okay, who the hell's got the problem here? Because maybe it's you, and like I said, that'd be convenient for me in a way, except I'm stuck with you. But maybe it's me. And then there's another impediment that isn't merely egotistical. It would be lovely for you to presume that you're right, and people love to do that. But there's another reason for that too. That's sort of outlined in Dante's Inferno. Because what you see is, if there's a recurring problem in your relationship, even your relationship with yourself, is that there's something underneath that's driving it. And unpacking that is a journey into hell. That's why people don't do it. Like if you have a problem in your marriage, that's a real problem, and you delve into it, it's like surgery for an infection. You'll get to the bottom of it. It will not be fun. And something seriously ugly is down there. And so that's down the rabbit hole in the Dante's Inferno. Now, Dante put betrayers at the lowest level of hell. And that's pretty damn accurate, because often what you'll find is if there's a recurring problem in a relationship, the reason that that problem is there is because, let's say, the person who's primarily responsible for that particular problem has been betrayed in some way that's either stopped their development at a certain age, so they're immature, or that's rendered them bitter and distrustful. And so you see a lot of problems between men and women in that manner, because like there's an element of the female psyche that distrusts men as a category. And the same is true for men. They distrust women as a category. And that's a real problem in a particularized relationship like a marriage. It's like, well, why don't you trust men? Well, maybe you're a woman who never had a positive experience with a man in your whole goddamn life. That's increasingly common, right? All the men you knew were absent. Sporadic relationships with your mother. Nothing dependable, right? Or a series of sponges, or worse, right? Exploiters.
How do you best work on those issues to fix them?
Which issues?
I would say anything that's under the surface, like you're talking about finding an infection and going down and surgically removing it. How do you even begin to broach those topics with a significant other?
Well, in my marriage, when Tammy and I got together, we'd known each other for a very long time by that point, but I indicated to her that if we were going to be together, we were going to tell each other the truth. That's a hard thing. And so it's hard in a sense. It's hard in the short term. That's another one of these indications that the hedonistic orientation is wildly lacking. Like there's nothing the least bit entertaining about solving a serious psychological problem. And I'm oddly constituted for that because I don't like conflict. It really upsets me. And so it's hard for me to delve into underlying problems. But what I like even less is having those problems continue. It's like, no, we're solving this right now. And so what does that mean? Well, it'll eventually mean tears on one person's part or the other. Might mean some screaming. God only knows. People have all sorts of ways of putting up resistances to that kind of inquiry too. You're mean. Well, and maybe you are. Leave me alone. I'll stomp out. I don't want to talk about this. Turn red, get angry, accuse you of all sorts of things. And you have to be able to persevere through that. And that also means that you have to have faith in the motives for your inquiry, because maybe you are just being a cruel son of a bitch and you won't let the person alone, going into their past and mucking about. So then the question there is, well, how can you trust yourself? Well, don't lie. That's the bottom line. It's like you want to trust yourself in a difficult negotiation. You better bloody well be sure that your orientation is upward. And how do you be sure of that? You evaluate yourself the same way you evaluate anyone else. If you're in a relationship with someone, they lie to you constantly, you're not going to trust them. It's no different for you. So that's why you have to have an orientation towards the truth.
Yeah.
And it has to be a kind of terrified orientation. And that's easy for me because I know what happens to people when they don't solve their proximal relationship problems. They end up in some sort of hell, divorce court hell. That's fun, especially if you have a few kids. You can be miserable for 20 years in divorce court.